Well, hey, welcome to the podcast today. I'm excited about the title of our subject, and that is your customer's biggest decision. And we're talking about helping farmers make grain marketing decisions, probably one of the least discussed about the farmer's decision making. And here's the importance of this topic. Most of us in the ag sales professionals that go to the farm, we go out on farm and we ask the producer to give us their money for our products. Well, grain marketers and merchants don't do that. They do actually the opposite of that. They go to the farm and try to give money away by buying their grain and their crops and their livestock. And so I'm really excited to welcome Susan Stroud. And I want to get this right. So Susan is been in the industry 15 years and worked for several large grain companies and some grain exporting facilities. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. She is the founder and analyst at No Bull. Her focus is agricultural commodities, including corn, soybeans, and wheat. Her deep understanding of the complex relationships within the global ag markets, and that's getting fairly relevant now that we're in an election year or just got through an election year. Her wealth of industry contacts plus 15 years of experience in the U.S. cash markets and its complex logistics to include river and export markets gives a unique perspective in a crowded pool of commentaries. She has a BS degree from University of Missouri and a master's in agriculture from Texas A&M. She's regularly featured on Bloomberg, participates in prominent industry events as a speaker, and we'll find out where you're speaking at, and is regarded as leading authority in inland river logistics. That's exciting for grain flow and biofuels. Her saying is learn something new every day, and that is exactly what you will get with her no bull approach. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, you're zooming in from the great state of Missouri, south of St. Louis, and we're excited to have you here. So, again, the topic is how to help producers make that most important decision. And I really am amazed by this, and I didn't realize it until I got into the grain business myself, that very few ag professionals will talk to a customer about how they make their decisions about the absolute income source, the number one, in some cases, the only income source on the farm. And that's how they make grain decisions. And I find it's part guesswork, myth. Some of them are very scientific in their approach, and you know better. So let's hear from yourself. If you would, just share a little bit about your ag background and how and why you got into the business that you're in right now with your no bull service to grain marketing.
Sure. So I started out at a country elevator in Southeast Missouri right after I graduated from college. I enjoyed the grain side of things. I didn't have a background in grain, even though I came from a small farm, but we didn't have row crops. So I ended up taking a job as a merchandiser with ADM in St. Louis. They have two large river facilities there on the Mississippi. And I was there for 6, 7 years. And then I went to work for Consolidated Grain and Barge at their Cahokia, Illinois location, which is also in St. Louis. And so in both of those jobs, I was in producer origination. So my job was talking to producers on the phone, and then fortunately getting into meeting many face to face, which is one thing that's really important when you're in a sort of sales position. So even though I'm in a position where I'm buying grain from customers, it's a sales position because you have to be able to sell yourself, as having the capabilities to help lead and guide them in the right direction with their own sales. So I was at CGB for 5 years, and when I was at ADM and then CGB especially, I was always somewhat of a writer, and I used email updates to just kind of help all of my producer customers stay on the same page or give them more information about what was happening, especially because river markets can be very finicky. They're very dynamic and things can change quickly. So
Sure.
especially because of barge freight, big changes in or changes in the freight market can make big changes in the basis and then the cash price paid to the farmer, and also lines and logistics and those sorts of things. And so I used it as a way to kind of help bolster my own approach to business with them and grow relationships by providing them something with value. So the last year that I worked for CGB, they actually rolled out my email updates to not only company-wide to all employees, but company-wide to all customers too. So several thousand people on that list. And so it turned into kind of an official thing where I'm writing these updates
Sure.
to a large group. So I left CGB in 2020 and I started doing some producer marketing and consulting with a friend that was in trading. I kept writing just as one to stay in practice. The other thing about it is it forced me to learn and to always be on, always be on my toes and knowing what's going on in the market. Because if you're putting
Sure.
something out regularly, you always have to be in the know. And then a little over 2 years ago, a friend encouraged me to, I mean, all along the way, I had been thinking, how can I turn this into something that's a revenue generator?
Right.
Um,
Right.
friend encouraged me to turn it into a paid subscription service with Substack, which is just a platform effectively for distributing content and managing subscriptions. So back in the fall of 22, when River Logistics got really nasty for the first time, I knew that that was my moment. I either had to do it, it was now or never, because it's
Sure.
something that unless you've been involved in working at an elevator day in and day out that's on the river, it's kind of hard to speak of or to understand some of the longer term implications of what's happening. From from there, it started out as a focus more thinking that I have more producer type customers or subscribers and a lot of focus on just fairly basic corn, soybean things. As time went along, though, I got deeper and deeper into renewable fuels. It first started with early on identifying the impact of California's low carbon fuel standard on the soybean
Sure.
oil market and then the resulting build out in US crush capacity. And then now we have a significant amount of policy changes ahead of us here in the next few weeks. We also have corn ethanol trying to find its way into sustainable aviation fuel
Sure.
via carbon capture and sequestration. So a lot of other things that it's pushed me in a direction that I didn't think as a merchandiser for corn and soybeans working, at a river facility that I'd ever be
Yeah.
talking about.
Well, it's
But
yeah.
and
Go ahead.
it's also well, and my audience has somewhat changed over time or evolved over time too. So while I still have a significant producer following, I would say that the majority of my readers now are they're managing money professionally. So either they're a
Hmm.
hedge fund or private office, something like that.
Sure.
A lot of large grain trading groups or institutions are followers of mine. And then also getting into a lot of like the biofuel space or your traditional energy companies. So it's been an interesting road.
Well, that's part of the life of being an entrepreneur. You may start out one path and realize I got a strength or a differentiator in an area there that I didn't realize there was a need for. It's also the fun of being a small business owner like yourself. You can switch paths today if you decide to and go down a different path or explore it for a little while and then cut it off. And I did the very same thing. I started out thinking I was going to do nothing but speaking at trade shows, but there's just not that many trade shows to keep your time. So training and coaching became part of that. I'd be curious to know, so so let's just ask this question. Who do you do business with, or who do you work with? And what is exactly maybe the products or services that you provide in your business? That'll give our audience some perspective on, this is for me, or maybe it's for my manager or for my neighbor or for my peer or my cohort or whatever. So who do you work with and what is it that the product or service that you generate for that?
Or so right now I provide a 2 time a week email subscription service. So
Okay.
it's a market wire that's predominantly focused on grains and oil seeds, but obviously a heavy focus on renewables here lately, as those are really important things driving the market. I never thought I'd be talking and writing about policy, but it turns out that those are I mean,
Oh,
that's
yeah,
what's
absolutely.
driving things, and that's the biggest unknown. I I like to, or I shouldn't say like to, but generally I'm taking things that are fairly complex topics and breaking them down into digestible nuggets. I
Sure.
rely heavily on graphics, huge amounts of charts, pictures, visuals, because at the end of the day, everyone's a visual learner.
Absolutely.
Um,
Especially in the grain where you can get lost in words. And trust me, I've read enough merchant wires from my own internal emails that came
yeah,
from the company to to the newsletters that you're familiar with that are out there on the market, and the words can just all of a sudden they all start blurring to bull bear factors. I do kind of like the idea. How did you end up on no bull? I kind of got an idea, but what's the significance maybe of that name? Because it doesn't mean uh that you're not bullish at times, I'm sure. But
yeah,
what's
well,
the
so it's kind of a two-part thing. So one, coming out of, a merchandising position where I'm always buying grain from farmers, it doesn't pay to be bullish. And, a farmer is inherently bullish. And so when you're trying to help someone navigate risk management, particularly a producer,
sure,
you have to be the voice of reason, and it's about talking more about profitability, or coming at it from that aspect instead of
sure.
so I have some farmer friends that affectionately refer to me as Susie Bear, if that tells
Ah,
you.
okay.
So,
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. If you came in and said, "Hey, I think prices are going up. Why don't you sell me your grain today?" It would probably wouldn't
well,
be.
that's true. And I would probably sell more subscriptions if I was
Yeah,
constantly bullish. I've no, there's a recurring theme around like your market updates or subscription
yeah,
services. And those that are always bullish seem to sell the best. But
it's true. Yeah, just
and
because
that
people want to hear, they want to hear that. They want to hear that there is a tomorrow, and to some extent, it's probably going to. But that's so. As you talk about that, how do you? In your estimation, and I'm too much on the spot, but it's kind of one of those things that your customer that may be listening or a potential customer would say, how do you differentiate what you do in, in what, in other words, why would I sign up for yours versus somebody else's? You mentioned the frequency. That can be a differentiator that to a week. I mean, I got on one years ago that was daily, if not twice a day or three times a day. It was almost like
that's too much.
it,
That's
they were giving me stuff like I could have been a day trader, which is not typically what a farmer is. I don't think most of them
and
aren't,
a
or
farmer doesn't need to be a day trader.
right,
That's
right, probably shouldn't.
um
So yeah,
well,
what do you kind of consider to be your, hey, here's what would be a differentiator for me?
that's the other way that, the term noble kind of comes into play here. And it's because I'm very it's about telling people what they need to hear versus what they necessarily, what they want to hear.
Right, right,
Um, it's a really important thing, because you can look at this, I can look at um numbers that came out, or I can look at some sort of situation, and you'll have 18 other people that write it a particular way. Oh, it was up 25% from last week, or it was this, or it was that. Well,
sure,
it's so important in this business to take a step back and look at the big picture. We have so many, we get tunnel vision. And a lot of, or in a producer's case, they get backyarditis with, whatever's happening to them,
sure,
and they
right,
lose sight of what's happened. We're in a world market more so than we ever have been before. That's not going to change. So it's really important that putting things in the right perspective to help from a risk management and a longer term view of things. In fact, I considered naming my update or my company something to do with perspectives, just because
sure,
that, having having the data and information is one thing, but being able to look at it from the right angle is another.
And I think some of the hardest part for a producer is like anybody else is speaking or thinking from your position. So if you own a bunch, you're bullish. If which means you're long. If it's in their bin, we've all had that experience. What are you waiting for? Well, I'm waiting for 4.25. As soon as it gets to 4.25, would you sell now? No, I'm waiting for 450 because it went up to 4.25. It's got to go to 450. And so there's always that struggle with the mindset is a bigger game in grain marketing because it's nobody knows. I mean, it's like investing in any market. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. We all can look back at 2016 and say, put your money in the stock market because it took off in 2016 on January 20th of, I guess, 17 when Trump got in. So now you could say, well, let's do the same thing, but you know what? The market can prove you really embarrassingly wrong by, the stock market, that is. So let's look at that from a perspective. There is a lot of unknown risk right now. We're recording this in December, mid-December, mid-January. We're going to have a new policy, new Secretary of Ags, and all the departments are going to change. What kind of overall, I mean, you can't say, hey, lock into here. Maybe you do that one-on-one with your customer, but for a public audience, what kind of advice maybe do you give, or what kind of thought process do you give to how someone might be protecting themselves from what could potentially be fairly negative from a grain trading standpoint?
This is a loaded question. So one thing that's probably aside, so we have two things coming at us here as the calendar's turning to 2025. So first we have the largest changes to policy-wise that affect ag since the inception of the renewable fuel standard. So tremendous changes going on the biofuel side of things, and that's kind of here the past several weeks turned the markets a little upside down as we've had many unknowns. And the government, the bigger issue is the government has failed to give us, they've said we're changing the rules of the game. You're going to play a whole new game come January 1, but they have yet to give us the rules. So that's one big issue. The other issue, obviously, is that we're having a complete about face or change in administration.
Sure,
So a few things with that. One, the market is afraid from a trade standpoint. So I think we have to keep in mind that one, this is the guy, the art of the deal. He's a negotiator and he likes to say things, and he says a lot of things that maybe aren't necessarily I'm not throwing Trump under the bus by any means, but he says a lot. Will all of these things happen? No, not necessarily.
sure,
When you think back to what happened with 18-19, that marketing year, and the original trade war, while it was impactful and it was a big deal, we also have to keep in mind that the US had a record bean crop that year. Brazil had two record bean crops in a row going into that year. Their exports increased something like 40% in a 2-3 year time.
sure.
China also, their hog herd was decimated with African swine fever. And so you put all those things together, and plus then you throw in a sprinkling of trade relations, then we had major challenges and headwinds. But if there's anything that I learned coming out of, or I should say surviving those years, it's that emotions run very high. The market likes to, we price things quickly. So, is some of maybe the pressure we've seen here heading into the election, post-election, that sort of thing. Maybe some of these purchases we've seen Mexico commit to a record amount of US corn. China, same thing, on a bit of a frenzy here lately. So
Yeah.
I'd like to think that we've been trying to price some of those things when the I mean, it's one of those deals when an actual tariff or whatnot is announced. It could be that we see the market close higher on the day because, we just you see a lot of weird things. It was the same way if you go back to 18 and 19 when we would make an agreement with China, then you'd see the huge flash of a bean sale and the market would close lower. I mean, it was, it's like sometimes these things, it feels like they don't make sense, but when you think back, we price them
Sure.
very quick.
Yeah,
Also, it so, and then the policy piece of it is an unknown. Trump was not super friendly biofuels, record amount of small refinery waivers issued during his first term. The other thing though is, so we have all this policy stuff that's potentially up in the air. The other thing that's a kicker is that it's biofuels look different than they did his first term. So
sure.
we've had all these soy crush capacity expansions, many of which have included big oil. So ADM Marathon, you have Shell Rock and Phillips 66, Bunge and Chevron have projects together. So you have a lot of, it's a much different look. And so I don't know what happens. I have no idea.
Sure.
I'd be lying.
That's good.
Anyone would be lying if they said that they
Yeah.
did. But,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
I guess my question is, would you protect yourself? The cheapest insurance, I mean, you correct me because you know the technical side of this. The cheapest insurance to me seems like some sort of option strategy that, hey, if depending on the time frame that you've got to market grain, if you know that you've got to empty your bins by August of 2025 to put your crop in there, or and you haven't marketed it yet, that kind of stuff, is that I mean, I don't think the recommendation would be go out and sell now because we think our markets are going to tank or hang on to everything because they're going to take off. That would be advice I haven't heard any grain marketing person provide, but I'm assuming that option strategies would be the typically approach that you would use to get some kind of an insurance, or is that
Yeah,
not
I
a
mean, you could buy puts until you're blue in the face, I suppose. Um, as a producer, if you still have old crop in the bin, I think it's really important to look at what the market's telling you. Where's we don't have a lot of carry in the bean market because we're anticipating that we have this record Brazilian crop that's coming on here in not too many months. In fact, their combine's rolling in some areas of Brazil now.
sure,
So, I think you have to look at what the market's saying to you. When we get in an inverted situation, uh, which we're starting to see more and more, especially with beans, because the market knows that there will be a flood of South American beans come by our springtime.
sure,
You have to, make risk management decisions around that and not based on the potential for some sort of summer rally.
right?
Same thing on the corn side. We're very demand driven right now on corn, and it's presented a lot of opportunities. I think it's, we've in the December WASD, we saw this tremendous decrease in corn carryout. One of our biggest decreases, I think, since in a monthly report since in more than 4 years. But again, we price things quickly. The market's relatively aware of it, and it's been a challenge because we haven't really seen corn rally much after that. And so,
Right, right.
again, it's going back to pricing quickly and making better risk management decisions based on profitability and not based on the emotions of, well, I'm going to gamble and see if corn is higher in a few weeks.
And that's a huge part. And that's part that the non-grain originating salesperson could probably approach that subject gently. And if they've got a good knowledge of the grain markets, most of the people that sell agronomy and other products to farmers don't have that deep of an understanding of, hey, what do I even talk about? How do I understand that? You get into ag lenders, they may not have a great understanding of the grain market, but they want to know, are people locking in profits? And in tight years, the ag lender is going to definitely be, hey, I'm going to give you this 750,000 or this 1.2 million operating note, and you're going to pay me back how? And so with that thought, what would be some ideas or thoughts that, hey, if I'm not a grain originator and know a lot about the markets, what would be some ways that I could talk to producers to understand or determine if their grain marketing plan is tied to their profit? Because right now the struggle is I don't have, the standard response from the farmer is I don't have enough money. I can't afford to farm. I'm selling grain below break even. Well, and this may be true. They say that almost every year, but it may be very true this year. And so they have to survive somehow, and they can't survive. I'm typically thinking they can't typically survive if they swing for the fences every year and hope for a 2012 rally of $8. And that was the struggle is, if I'm selling to somebody that swings for the fences, I hope everything's paid for because if they miss and it's a strikeout, they've got to survive to the next year and they're not going to be able to pay me if they can't. So how would a person that's not in the grain business approach maybe that subject with a producer and start to understand, does this person lock in profits and can they pay me for my products that I'm selling?
Yeah, it's funny you said something about the swing for the fences. So a lot of times the guys that are the absolute worst marketers are the ones that don't need the money because they're never forced into making a decision, and so they can just wait, wait, wait. The ones that have a constant need for cash flow, those a lot of times are the ones that are best prepared because they know it, so they're able to, or they're forced to kind of plan ahead of time for it. Um, so if let's just say you have a producer customer today and he's really up a creek because he has bins full of old crop that he hasn't done anything with, and he's struggling with that. You know, sometimes the best approach, as odd as this sounds, is helping them because a lot of times they can get so bogged down with the horrible decisions or missing the boat, on the old
Right.
crop, that they miss opportunities for new crop. And I'm not necessarily saying that today is some sort of huge opportunity for new crop, but I think that a lot of times you can help them the most by saying, okay, let's forget about the problem at hand and then let's start by looking forward to next year because you're going to grow a crop again. I mean, assuming that you're securing financing. This can all,
Sure.
this is a
Sure.
good way to lead into it because you can look at uh, what is look at new crop values and then kind of start there. And then when you're selling bushels, there's a very logical order that you kind of a checklist almost you need to go down. So when you're selling bushels first and thinking about new crop, you have to think about space first. And don't give me any of that. I don't know what it's going to yield. That's fine. But every year you're planting X amount of acres, you can come up with some sort of average. Just start with a
Sure.
number. So what can I hold? Because what I can't hold, then that means I have to figure out a plan for it. And those need to be your first sales for these bushels that you're not going to be able to hang on to. So that's first. Second is about cash flow. You can't go sell a bunch of January delivery stuff if you have bills that are due December 1. So then you have to start structuring more sales that are around when you have financial obligations. And of course, the banker is going to love to hear this because they want to get
Sure.
paid.
Right.
And third is thinking about logistics. So, a lot of these guys that end up being hoarders, they hoard old corn in the bin all the way until June or something, and then they're hauling like crazy because they're forced to get rid of it before to make room for new crop. And so and some farms are large enough or they simply just don't have the trucking capacity that you have to kind of think strategically about when am I able to haul bushels, and I need to somewhat structure sales around that too. So
Sure.
that's the just the very basic approach that I like to
Sure.
take with people because it helps them think about the decision. It helps take some of the emotion out of it too, because you're thinking, because at the end of the day, this is a business. You're not just a farmer driving a tractor. You are someone that operates what in many cases is a multi-million dollar business. And
Right.
you have an obligation to approach it from a business mindset instead of this highly emotional disaster that we see time and time again.
And I think that there's a couple areas I'd like to throw in and get your kind of opinion. Those are great approaches, is having some form of a systematic approach. And of course, there's a lot of companies and maybe even yourself that promote smaller sales to lock in profitability as you go along. And but the one that you brought up is the concept of removing the emotional side. And here's what I see a lot as working with the grain originators was dad typically had the purse strings on grain trading. And dad could be 80 years old. I mean, it was crazy in the grain business. Some of the oldest decision makers in the farming business still hang on to that. Well, when they started out 30, 40, 50 years ago and took that over from their dad, it was different grain marketing. I mean, you mentioned the city of St. Louis, which is between St. Louis and East St. Louis. Everybody is right there at that highest northernmost point of the river that doesn't freeze and all that, and has have locks and dams. And I mean, now you can turn left, right, go straight and hit every single major. St. Louis has become what do they call it? The ag coast of America. And so this is really the marketing in that grain market. And then on the river itself, I came from the grain marketing in Indiana, it was predominantly ethanol and poultry operations, sending to poultry over to the river. And it was every other year, it was either flooded or drought. So our spouts either were too high or too low. And my idea of getting a pants leg and just creating a device that could get it in the barge didn't work out. But so I think as what is some of the aspects that you look at? I mean, let me put it this way. What would be the most important thing that you wish every farmer knew about marketing their grain? What is it, something? And then we'll jump over to the grain merchant or buyer and say, hey, the farm market or whatever we call them that goes to the farm. What is it that you wish every farmer knew about grain trading and merchandising their crop?
Um, I feel like you're looking for some sort of insider secret, but I would say, what's the old KISS thing? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yep.
Um, we overcomplicate everything. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've watched time and time and time again is farmer going headfirst into basis contracts. And just because it's this alternative to, or you're able to move the bushels, you're able to get some money, but then you see unlimited upside potential, right? Because you haven't locked the futures in. And what they forget about is the unlimited downside potential, and then rolling, and you keep eating the carry. And I've just seen so many people make horrendous decisions that way.
And what
Um,
promotes that? What's the major
hope,
emotional
hope.
hope? Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
the old thing of hope and happiness, or the emotional grain
yeah, I think
marketing. Yeah,
this is probably the first time that I've ever just immediately been like, basis contracts, worst thing ever. But it's just it's a horrible, it's a way to delay the decision-making process again.
yeah,
And it just makes it more complicated. And I'm not saying that there aren't opportunities from a basis perspective,
right,
but a lot of times, and like if an elevator calls you and says, "Hey, Greg, we have this," which this happens a lot this time of year, you have holiday stuff going on, especially if you're like in a feeding type situation and they need, they're short on bushels this week. You can see like these quick ship bids that pop up, and then
right,
you're like, "Oh, they're bidding me a 30 over. That's great. I'm just going to do basis. The board's going to go up." And then before you know it, your 30 overs turned into 10 under and the board's dropped 50 cents. And suddenly you have a big problem on your hands. And it gets to that point, you're so far down the road, you just cry uncle and you're like, I want done with it. I'm I can't handle it anymore. And it's almost like water under the bridge. But when all in reality, that's profitability that's going down the toilet because you've approached this again from this emotional standpoint instead of making a decision.
and that's probably the biggest surprise was how emotional grain trading, merchandising, buying from farmers, how emotional how much emotion was involved in the decision making. You just mentioned one of those. A big one was fear of missing out. We had a couple fall run-ups where prices went up in the fall. Typically not the pattern. The pattern has been the 12-year pattern is it tails off, obviously, because the supply comes in. But you still would have the people that would refer to those years and say, I just don't want to miss out on, what happens if this happens and that happens. And then I think what you mentioned is understanding when to use. There's so many tools from options and future strategies, and not everybody on farm knows how to use those tools. And I'm not talking about the producers, I'm talking about people that recommend them. And so there's incentives for one. Delayed, DP was one that we always struggled with, which was kind of,
Yeah.
but it was like everything else. It typically would catch the attention. It was a bright, shiny object that jumped at something that they thought they could grab right away, and didn't realize that on the backside of that was where all the loss would come from. And I think basis, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, farmers really felt like that, well, we did influence basis. We could set our basis as a company, driven by the market, what we could sell for. But they felt like that was going to change we could change that, but they wouldn't beat us up on the board because we obviously couldn't change the board unless they were really conspiracy and thought the ABCs of the world changed the board, But how do you play into that when somebody's like, well, I'm going to focus in on basis, which is such a smaller part of.
I mean, they're just looking at they're missing the forest for the trees. Um, and again, it's about taking responsibility for the decisions that you're making. I hate it when they get so fixated on whatever's going on with the basis, or that again they're missing the bigger picture. You can have a basis that's a 5 under and a cash price be a 450. You can have a basis that's a 10 over and a cash price that be 450. You have
Yeah,
to, and at the
sure.
end of the day, what are you getting paid? You're getting paid cash.
Mm.
So I'm not saying that cash sales are always the greatest sales, but it is, what is it that's net back to you is the important thing. And what kind of decisions are you going to make ahead of time, or just learning that um I think my biggest thing is just learning how to recognize opportunities instead of being like, oh, well, if I just give it one more day, or what if, or if it just gets
Yeah.
to this. So
Well, and I think
those,
having a target, it's good. I mean, we used to say, I forget the saying, it was like, you miss it for a nickel or you miss it for a penny or two.
yeah.
And and you're holding out for that absolute hard number and then you miss the opportunity. And I think those are struggles. So let's take the grain originator now, the merchant, and what are some of the biggest pieces of advice that when you're working with a group of, speaking to a group of originators at say a great state feed and grain association, and you're talking to them, what are some of the concepts or some of the best advice that you give them on, hey, it's tough out here working with farmers. Here's some of the best strategies or not strategies, but some of the best concepts from your material and your viewpoint that you give them.
Helping them understand that just like the producer, they don't need to, we don't have to be able to spout off the exact Indian stocks number that we're at right now. It's about direction and kind of understanding those bigger picture concepts. And then also, again, helping producers just look at markets from a different angle, where they're able to recognize opportunity and not necessarily, well, what could be on down the road.
Yeah.
So, you I think as soon as you're able to, and it took me a long time to be able to do this, and then I have producer customers that I've been working with for more than a decade. And it's taken them more than a decade to be able to slowly start to, I mean, producer's a creature, well, we're all creatures of habit, but man,
Sure.
farm the worst. So
Yeah.
helping them, helping them just make these very small changes that, and I think we get too hung up on what the shoulda, woulda, coulda, or the mistake that we already
Well,
made.
you mentioned that in the new crop, in the old crop, new crop. In the old crop, if they made mistakes in that, they're sitting on that. It's like, how do I now sell something I
Ball
may have?
and chain. Yeah, it's like a prison sentence when you're so focused. I have a producer client that well, I always say, it's when sold sold too soon. We go from sold too soon to didn't sell enough. I had a producer
Certainly.
client.
Yeah.
I was at a shop one day and I helped him set up a new email account. He needed a new Gmail. And so I set up sold too soon at gmail.com.
You should probably get the dot coms of those because you're right. You would, and we had this with managed funds where you are managed grain bushels where they would put bushels with us for the year to trade. The immediate response was always, well, that didn't work out. I spent my money and it didn't return, or I should have put more bushels in. And then you had the next year when they try to put everything in there and you got to, they, we're not putting
Yeah,
100%
all
in. So
things, I I I love managed programs just because it's like the crock pot method, you set it, you forget it. And many
absolutely.
those are bushels that wouldn't otherwise be sold.
Right.
You just
Right.
remember years and years as a merchant, and we'd get to November, December when someone needs to start hauling in grain, and the only sales they had on the book are the 10 or 20,000 that they not so willingly put into some sort of
That's right.
program.
That's
And then
right.
they're like, oh, maybe I should have done a little more, you think?
One, and you get free, it's like a mutual fund. You can see a free, not free, you got to pay for the bushels that are in there, but you get a bird's eye view of what grain traders, professional grain traders, and they make mistakes too. None saying they're perfect. Obviously, the results of their programs don't always pay off, but you at least get a professional's opinion. Usually it's a group of professionals opinion on what they're going to do with their market. You can see what they're sold at, the percentage they're sold, and so yeah, I mean, having that something in that program is I think it's a very positive for producers. And there was those years when something got missed, and there was or 2012. Yeah, okay,
Oh,
nobody predicted the
things
drought,
happen.
so
Things
yeah,
happen.
right,
Um, one of the other things and this goes all the way back to my country elevator days when I didn't know squat about grain markets at all.
right,
And me being like this early 20s, very nervous and
sure,
self-conscious girl trying to figure out this grain thing. But as soon as you ask a producer what their cost of production is, I mean, it's like you take the air out of the balloon. They
yeah,
A lot of them they don't know, maybe they don't want to know. I When you start to have that conversation with them and hold their feet to the fire, and then helping them really understand that, what does your P&L look like, and how
right,
does this pencil per acre, and those sorts of conversations. And they can get really uncomfortable for you too, because then what do you do if this
yeah.
guy's 20 cents
Well,
below his
that's what you bring up is a really critical point, is taking the step from a grain buyer to being what I call a trusted advisor. And it takes some, you got to have a lot of trust to get behind that curtain. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't recommend somebody walk out and ask somebody's break even day one, but
yeah, that's
yeah,
probably not the best idea.
yeah, you got to establish a lot of trust. Now, once you get to that point, you start to have some really good conversations about locking in goals on profit per acre and you getting above your break even, and then starting to look at the inputs. If somebody does get you five more bushels, is that five bushels profitable or is it unprofitable? Give it, and are you going to take advantage of that profit, which is actually making the sale? So, yeah, doing the ROI of what they're doing and buying land. But I think one of the things you're alluding to, and I think this is very critical, is a lot of producers and a lot of agribusiness that I work with don't bring the two input costs and the selling price revenue, in this case, of their grain together and say, is this matching this? And I mean, you could never go into a large publicly traded company and say, I'm just going to spend money and then I'm just going to make money. And if I don't match those two up, I don't know what I'll do. I mean, you can't do that. You have to close those. Now, maybe you don't have to do that on the farm as close to that. As before, we mentioned some people have the entire farm paid for and everything's profit basically, so to speak. But still, when you start to have those conversations, the best grain buyers I ever saw were able to have that conversation you just talked about is, you're making a profit. You talked about having this, your yields are here. And then bringing the third equation was using crop insurance, kind of how it's designed to be used, which is amazing. The amount of they probably shouldn't even, and this is my own opinion, but probably shouldn't call it crop insurance because it is, but it's not. It's a little different than just a pure disaster insurance. It's actually kind of a grain trading tool. And
Yeah, it
maybe
could be.
you can throw in your opinion on how you work with producers and people on that aspect too.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't get into the weeds on crop insurance, but I know that having an agent that knows their stuff can be one of the most profitable decisions that any farm can make. So
Absolutely.
that's
So
an important piece to this.
my advice to that is if the person does home and auto and sidelines and crop insurance, you better be
Yeah,
really getting crop insurance yourself because
yeah.
that's common. And I've seen it to where people didn't even file claims and they could have filed claims. And I mean, it's just what you just said hit the nail on the head is if a good crop insurance agent can really do wonders for you. Well, hey, Susan, I appreciate you spending some time. I want to talk a little bit about two couple of things. One, you have some cool events. You call them, let me get the terminology right, a
Oh,
summit.
okay. But while
Go
while
ahead. Yeah,
you're so what just one last thing that I think's the most important, and it doesn't really have anything to do with
sure.
the business decisions per se, but empathy. So, in any type of sales position, it doesn't matter what it is. Um, the more that you are able to understand where your customer, the producer, whoever it might be, where they're coming from, and then the
Sure.
more we're all people at the end of the day. My customers and now my subscribers that read my stuff, they know my kids well because my kids are my grandma, my family, it's a big kind of part of what I'm talking about. And that goes all the way back to the days as I was a merchandiser. I sent Christmas cards to every customer and I used to take hams and deliver to customers, that kind of stuff.
Wow.
Just those are the things as soon as you get to know them more on a personal level and they get to know you more on a personal level, that is almost a guaranteed recipe for success. So that's all I got on that.
Well, and it builds trust, that they see who you
Yeah.
are as a person. It's not the only thing you can provide. If, some people try to sell too much on friendship, but it's a big part knowing you that you're ingrained in the business and your life revolves around the business and that your family's part of it. And I think that's what makes when you get down to the end of the career stage, closer to where I'm kind of at, those are the rewards that you look back and say that was the greatest part. Yeah,
Yeah.
you had to make money, you had to make sales, but those relationships and doing good by your customers is absolutely the best part for sure.
And you need to be seeing them a few times a year in person. Those
Yeah.
things are so.
So let's talk
And
about that. You're going to be speaking at some events if you'd like to share that, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about these are the most fun. I'm envious because you do these. You have a summit where you get together for several days in a U.S. city somewhere, and then you also have something called Ag Ventures. You're going to be going to. I'll let you tell about where you're going to be going with a elite group of folks.
Sure. So, on the conference side of things, I'm assuming it will be in August again in 25, but I've done two so far now in St. Louis. And it's been this past year's huge focus on sustainable aviation fuel and kind of next generation of biofuels. good opportunity for just to mix and mingle with a lot of different people from all aspects of the industry and beyond. So it's it's more or less a social event where we're all there to learn something new. And
Sure.
then on the learning front, I've wanted to do this for a while, so I'm getting into international group trips every winter. So the first one is mid-January here coming up, and we're going to the Panama Canal. So we will
Awesome.
do we have 4 nights in Panama. So we're touring the canal both by boat, where we will accompany a vessel. We'll be on a tour boat, but we'll be accompanying a vessel through 3 of the locks on a tour, which is pretty exciting. And then we will also do a land tour, so we'll be able to see both the original Panamax locks and the new Neo Panamax locks up close. So pretty
That is a
excited.
cool. That is awesome that you're doing that. I applaud you for that. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of coordination, and it's not easy. And you got to, obviously it's chicken and the egg. You got to sign people up, and then you also got to have enough to book it. And so I think that's admirable to put that together. And I can't tell you how valuable it is for people that are in the trading business to have the experience of going to something like that. I took a group of grain buyers to that originated on the river, had never been to the facilities that we had as a company down at New Orleans.
Oh yeah,
And
super
it was an
fun.
eye opener. Yeah. And it was the year that vomitoxin was all in the wheat crop in
Oh,
the
that's
14. So we had the parking lot of barges that were full of old wheat that they were mad we didn't buy. I mean, it was such a good learning experience for people to do that. And I think the same could be said for those people that might participate with you is you get to see things that you hear about, but when you see them firsthand, you can talk about the people who it was funny when we asked what's that parking lot across the river of barges, and then he said that's all the wheat that got shipped down here that's no longer good because our buyers aren't going to take it. So they're, doing what they have to do. So how would someone, if they wanted to work with you or be a part of one of these summit or ag venture, how do they get a hold of you and find out how to connect with you and your business?
You can visit my website, which is nobullag, NOBULLAG.com, or Twitter is Susan at Susan Noble.
You find you're on Twitter a lot and you're on obviously LinkedIn. I
Yeah,
see.
so Twitter and LinkedIn are my it's amazing how many subscribers come from one of those two platforms.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate your time again, Susan. Any final thoughts as we head out of here and check on the markets before they close for a brief period and then reopen or whatever that happens these days?
I don't know. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always good to I mean, I spend, well, you had mentioned speaking engagements. I think I'm gone almost every week from, once we get into January through mid-March or so. I do a lot of speaking engagements, which it's it's fun because I get to meet a lot of new people and see a lot of different parts of not only ag but other industries too.
Sure.
I never, coming as a merchandiser that worked at river facilities, so very export centric and corn and beans, I never imagined that I'd be spending most of my days talking about biofuels and policy, but it's a good thing. It's been a fun journey, but I appreciate you having me on. It's good to kind of get back into those merchandising discussions today.
Excellent. Appreciate it. And we'll see you out there on the road somewhere. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, thank you.